When you're playing rock and pop keyboards, you're going to be playing chords along with a guitarist perhaps, but if you're just the keyboard player in a band, you'll be doing chords and sort of keeping the harmony together. Now, I like to think of music as a sandwich. You have a bass line, which is one piece of bread, and then the melody line, which is another piece of bread, and then something in the middle that glues it all together, your jam, your cheese, whatever. That is the chords. Now, how do we go about this then? Because actually we don't want our chords to be moving in the same way that a bass line or a top line moves. The filling of your sandwich needs to hold everything together. How are we going to do this then? And how do we learn what our chords are without lots and lots of books and music reading? Well, I've got some methods. Let's take a look. So here then I'm armed with a sheet of paper. If I put it on the other camera there and just zoom in, you will see that there are essentially all of the notes of your scale arranged in a circle. In fact, they all fit on a clock face. So if you've got a cheap wall clock, you could actually replace the numbers with this just as a way of learning it. So let's say I want a C chord, C major. Now, the word major isn't used very much in rock and pop terms. It's C. And if you have a minor chord, then the word minor is added. So major is kind of a default chord. So if we look at the top, we've got C. If we want to know what the other two notes are in that chord, all you do is move one step clockwise and they're shown as a pair. So we've got G and E. So C, G and E. Anywhere else on the chord? E, B and G sharp. That's an E chord. D is D, F sharp and A, etc. An A flat chord is A flat, E flat and C. We'll come to those sort of things in a minute with mixing. You don't want to mix sharps and flats. It's either all sharps or all flats. So how's this going to work then with minor chords? Well, what you do is you work out your major one, and then whatever letter is on the inside of the circle, you drop by 1/2 step or semitone. So C minor would be C, E flat and G. So leaving this aside, and I'll put this piece of paper on at the end so you can take a screenshot and just print that out or whatever you like to do. So as I said before, the harmony, we don't want it to move very much. If we have, not only is it involve you moving long distances on the keyboard, and also it doesn't really sound very nice. So we had, I think I had C and A minor, D minor and G. But how about if we did this? C, A minor, D minor and G. All I've done is swap the notes around so that I don't have to move very far. So when you're learning your piano chords, quite a good rule of thumb and quite a good way to start this. Of course, the piano is a wide-ranging instrument. You can use any of it. But when you're playing in a band, you're going to need to be doing communication. You look at the bass player and the drummer or whatever. And of course, if you're singing, you might be reading your lyrics. So you don't want to be having to look down at the piano all the time because, of course, you're then away from the microphone, which is there. And then your sound disappears. So what you could do is to say, okay, I'm going to have all my chords around middle C, which is this note here, the C in the middle of the piano. So I could say, okay, I'm going to have all my chords between this G and this G. And I'm not going to move outside that zone at all. Okay, so if I have a C chord, it could be that. It could be this as well. But try to make sure that middle C is always within the boundaries of your chord. So if I go from C, if I want an F chord, that's outside my boundary. So I've got to think, okay, I'm going to maybe find F, A and C. Well, I could keep the C and have the A and then the F at the top here. It might seem like a lot of work to sort of think, oh, I've got to remember all these chords in a specific way, but actually what you end up being able to do is to feel your way around. Now, of course, the piano has been designed by another human being for another human being to play, so it's not going to be made really difficult in terms of music. Most people can reach an octave. So if that's a G and that's a G, you can find a D or an F sharp or an A. Nearly didn't find it. Okay, but there you are. There's your sort of... now, if I one other thing you could do, of course, is to say, well, okay, I'm going to put two objects on the piano which prevent me from going outside this range. So C, F, D minor, B flat, A flat, E, E minor. So I can get all of those chords by simply not having to move very far. Now, of course, the learning of the chords, you don't want to just sit down and learn all 24 chords, all 12 majors and 12 minors, because actually it's very easy to forget them and forget what a particular chord is, and it can get quite confusing. So the answer is to simply learn songs. Learn songs that are in different keys. For example, I don't know, Don't Stop Me Now by Queen. So it's F, A minor, D minor, G minor and C. So I haven't had to look at all. If I played them all in root position or had the keynote at the bottom, I'm going to have to move sort of goodness knows how far. Whereas if you know where your F chord, running inside out, running around in ecstasy, so don't stop me now. Don't stop me and having a good time, having a good time. Now, your left hand. What you do with this is you simply play one note that pertains to your bass note. So if we have a C chord here, you put your left hand on a single C. And the beauty of piano playing, and the reason the piano sounds so good on its own, is because you're actually doing quite a few jobs at once. Not only are you playing the chords, you're playing the bass and you're playing the drums. Bass, snare, bass, bass, snare, bass, snare, 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 dun, dun, ga, digga, digga, ga, dun. So you're doing many, many jobs, which means that you don't want to have to flitter around the piano. You want to be able to sit there and just groove away on it. So C to F. Now, of course, the bass line, you're going to have to move to find the actual note F. It's a bit different with the chords. You can move just tiny amounts, but with the left hand, you actually have to find your bass note. But again, you could have your left hand maybe on two Cs and then be able to find the notes F, A minor, D minor, G, C, F. So I've been able to find my bass line. So you're having to think of two jobs at once. You're thinking, where's that bass note going? Oh, it's C down to F. So learning things like intervals, that is the distance between two notes, C to G being a fifth, for example, or C to F is a fourth, that sort of thing. Now, learning those sort of musical distances really does help, but notice we've not done any music reading or any sort of manuscript or anything like that at all. You can do all this without having to learn to read music, which is kind of a boon for the sort of rock and pop world, where it's basically pattern based and it's more sort of songs rather than specific bass and treble clef, for example. Now, I'm a fluent music reader, but you know, in a rock and pop sense, I don't do any of that because it's more about the chords. It's more about delivering the sort of, you know, your main vocal and communicating with the band and doing all of that sort of thing. Now, that's not to diss any orchestral players, because of course they've got to watch the conductor. They've got to be listening. An orchestra, you listen to the other people in your section, or you know, in other sections. The whole thing has to gel. So actually music is music in that regard. The communication is important whatever style you play in. So there is a little introduction to now these chords. Now, just before I go, I was just mentioning about the sharps and flats. Now, if we look at a chord of D flat major, for example, we have the notes D flat, A flat and F. Now, the way I've orientated the notes on here, if it's a D flat major chord, you'd only use flats if you had other black notes. So D flat, A flat, and then we've got F. F is also called E sharp, rather sort of oddly. You do come across this sometimes. So if you have a chord of C sharp major written, which is the other way of writing this, it would be C sharp, G sharp and E sharp. What's E sharp then? Well, it's a white note, it's F. E sharp is basically sounds the same as F. Notice I say sounds the same because actually in technical terminology things like E sharp and F aren't the same if you're looking in a particular key. Or I mean, string players, for example, myself, I'm a violinist, I would actually tune notes slightly differently according to what key that's in. But of course, with piano, all the notes are fixed. So there we are, a little brief introduction into rock and pop piano.